Welcome to this episode of the Antichrist series. We're considering what Gabry'el, who is Dowd, Gabry'el means God's most courageous and competent man, revealed through Daniel in 555 BCE, about 600 years before he would fulfill the very promises that he was discussing. And as we continue, we hear our king say, "Therefore, know, Yada, it is beneficial for you to be aware of, to possess this information that is required to recognize, to acknowledge Yada, and to gain thereby the insights to understand Washakal, realizing that the best option is for you to be prudent after learning, succeeding by and prospering by being attentive, properly educated, enlightening, and wise, perceiving that from the going forth of the word, the stage being set to begin the process in accord with the message, to return and to restore. Shabu'wah, rebuilding Jerusalem, the source of teaching and guidance on reconciliation, until the restoring testimony and the eternal witness of the Son of the Sovereign, who is conspicuously making this known, and who is providing the leadership and counsel on behalf of the Mashyach, the anointed Messiah, or 7 sevens, and thus 7 promises and fulfilled vows. Therefore, in 62 weeks, she will be restored. She will return and rebuild and reestablish and fortify the way to grow and to expand. Rakab, opening the way by expanding where people can congregate to grow larger, by being diligent and decisive, by becoming sharper, more determined, and increasingly judgmental in a troubled time of oppression, during a period of anguishing subjugation, restrictions, constraints, and persecution, being harassed into and pushed into a corner. Daniel, my God, is judgmental, 9:25. Then after the 62 weeks, the anointed Messiah, he will be cut off and separated, but not for himself. Gabry'el, who made this pronouncement, he is God's most confident and capable, courageous and combative man, prefaced the prophecy with Yada and with Shakal. That is to say, by prudently processing this information as it comes from the man Yahweh would refer to as Yada, we gain the insights needed to understand. And in this way, Dowd, as Gabry'el, is the thinking man's prophet. When he is speaking, as is also the case with Elia and with Yashayah, one's brain needs to be engaged to keep pace. So when he repeatedly indicates that to figure this out, we will need to be discerning, learning by processing the information which he is providing in a exceedingly intelligent, cerebral manner. Experience dictates that we follow his advice. In other words, we should consider how the pieces of this puzzle that he has provided fit together, as opposed to, say, plucking the Mashyach references out of context to promote an agenda contrary to something else, he said. And on that same page with the Messiah, we should linger on this page for a moment and spend a little more time with him. He is predicting that there will be a public decree issued regarding the liberation of Yehudim, Jews, from Babel, from commingling and confusion, Therefore, it is worth considering the similarity between this and the decree to leave Miqra'ey, the crucibles of religious and political oppression during Pesach, to begin the Matsah Exodus. This is because Yahweh introduced Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym, and then Shabu'wah to the physically literate children who were ultimately liberated as the children of Yisrael from religious and political oppression. Unfortunately, they took it with them, but God separated them from it. The process would continue with Yahweh explaining the nature of these Miqra'ey to Moshe within his Torah guidance, which is likely was received, although we're not told specifically. It's certainly implied, beginning on Shabu'wah. This ultimately led to God's people entering, the promised land, but after 40 years. The proclamation Dowd is currently addressing is similar. This time, Yehudim will be liberated from religious and political subjugation in Babel, which is the birthplace of the beast, which would evolve from Babylon to Media-Persia, to the empire of the Greeks, to that of Imperial Rome, and then Roman Catholicism. Not only would they be physically freed, Yehudim would be able to rebuild Jerusalem, the source of guidance on reconciliation in the city of Dowd. So after the passage of a specified time, Dowd's nefesh soul would return to his city to serve his people by fulfilling Pesach and Matsah, leading to Bikuwrym. Then the promise of enrichment and empowerment was honored, and would play out in the harvest of Shabu'wah. In so doing, the nefesh souls of the covenant members would be allowed to come home to survive the tyranny of Roman politics and the subjugation of the Roman Catholic religion. Nearly 40 Yobel thereafter, we are using Shabu'wah and Towrah to call the covenant family back home, back to the promised land, to their Messiah, and to Yahweh. This will culminate with the grand reunion during Dowd's return on Kippurym, reconciliations, which leads to Sukah, camping out with our Father and his family forevermore. Now, in this way, with the proclamation to leave Babylon, and restore Jerusalem, the source of guidance on reconciliation, one event foreshadows the next, becoming a harbinger for what follows. Each step liberates us from religious influence and political control so that we can come home and live as part of God's family. In conjunction with the redemption of his people, the Neged, son of the sovereign, by Neged publicly revealing what would occur, explaining how it would transpire, and then demonstrating the character and courage to bring this to fruition, is the very man who is providing the leadership and counsel as Mashyach, the Messiah. He is fulfilling his vows and those of his father over the course of 7 Mowed. But of course, there's more to it than that, because Dowd would have a herald, and his name would be Yada, and he would be a son of the sovereign. Now, recognizing that Dowd's gruesome and heroic portrayal of his soul's fulfillment of Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym in the 22nd Mizmor, depicting what would happen to him more than 400 years prior to this proclamation and 1,000 years before he would endure that torment, this pronouncement may be the most cathartic ever made. It began after the 62 weeks. The anointed Mashyach will be cut off, but not for himself, actually, is how it concluded. Now, this self-portrait is awe-inspiring, really. So courageous and compassionate, it's hard to properly convey the enormity of this moment. We should all be overwhelmed that Gabry'el Dowd volunteered to endure. And this, and overjoyed that he saw it through and accomplished the mission. And I'm also horrified by what the religious have done to cheat him and us of the magnitude of this gift. Now, I'm not immune to criticism either. Over the past 24 years, I've made more excuses for Daniel 25 and 26 than anything else in the Tanakh. And now I know that it is only from the perspective of Dowd revealing what he would achieve that these words actually ring true. The only prophetic statements which rival this in the challenge they pose to translation and understanding are 2 Samuel 7 and Yashayah 9, both of which we have and will continue to consider. And it was in the first of these, reading Yahweh's response to Dowd, wanting to build a home for him, that we were finally able to resolve the identity of the Son of God and the very man who will return as king, both being Dowd, neither being Jesus. After all, that was required for it to be consistent with the whole of God's story and for us to understand this entire episode, this narrative on the covenant. And in that case, we had to appreciate that God went from speaking to us or speaking directly to his beloved Son to speaking to us about him. And in this case, we have some similar challenges as it relates to the audience. God is speaking of him, in that case, to us, and then he goes directly back to speaking to his Son in 2 Samuel 6. The identity of the Son, of course, in Yashayah 9, also lays in the recognition that the only name which appears in the text identifies him as Dowd. There's only one person to whom all of these accolades are applicable as well. So if you recall, in the preamble to this prophecy, Gabry'el, God's most capable and courageous man, listed many things which would be resolved as a result of what he would accomplish, some of which were achieved during Chag Matsah, while most will be fulfilled upon Dowd's Yom Kippurym return, and actually the preamble to that on the day of the herald, Yom Towrah. They are listed together because they will be accomplished on behalf of the same Messiah. And speaking of HaMashyach, if not Dowd, how would a new one have been anointed such that we could learn of him? Dowd had clearly stated that this would bring an end to prophecy. That's quite an oops, isn't it? If you're going to pretend this applies to anyone else, there can be absolutely no indication from God that that is the case, because all references to his Son, who is also the Messiah, are directed at Dowd, David, and no one else. And with this bringing it into prophecy, there can be no other Messiah. There would be no one for Yahweh to work with or speak through after the last of the prophets, Zechariah, Yoel, then Malachi, 2,500 years ago. Now, since we know the timing of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, and we have done the math, we know that the Messiah's arrival was to coincide with the fulfillment of Chag Matsah in the Yobel year of 4000 Yah, 33 CE, in absolute harmony with the Torah's instructions. Since Hamashiach's body was karat, cut down and died on Passover, and then was karat, separated on unyeasted bread, a Shabat, with the firstborn released and returned to his father on the invitation of firstborn children. The individual fulfilling the Torah's promise could not have been the founder of a Torah adverse religion, could he? That would have been absurd. The notion is preposterous. Yahweh knew that something special was going to occur in his city. Dowd was fully aware of this long before this time, 450 years in advance of it. He had already released and shared prophecies regarding how he was going to fulfill this. And so he knew that the guidance regarding reconciliation in 7 plus 62 weeks of years from the pronouncement to return was being laid out here through him as a prophet, and that it pertained to him because he was going to endure it. We have been given a starting point, one we will track down in a moment, pertaining to the announcement to return and restore Jerusalem by the man who built Jerusalem into the city of Dowd 3,000 years ago. He was the most prolific source of restoring testimony found within Yahweh's eternal witness. Moreover, Dowd is the most conspicuous of Yahweh's leaders and the most profuse of counselors. He was also the preeminent Mashyach, having been anointed 3 times on Yahweh's instructions. Once again, the timing, if we are to read it as such, is predicated on Shabu'wah, Shabu'wah, 7 promises and contractual vows fulfilled in harmony with Shabu'wah over 7 periods of 7 weeks. While Dowd will soon return to fulfill Kippurym and then serve as the king of Sukah, the Son of God embodies Bikuwrym. He is the Bikor, the firstborn son of God, by God's own acknowledgement. And he is the product of Shabu'wah, which occurs 7 weeks later. He is Yahweh's Bikor, as I have said, his firstborn son, and the foremost beneficiary of Shabu'wah, of 7 sevens. Yahweh has overtly empowered and enriched, enlightened and enabled Dowd, which is why even his seat of honor will be as brilliant as the sun in God's presence. Now, once home, the result would have nothing to do with buildings or plazas or broad avenues, defensive walls or moats, as other translators will claim. When we turn to the verbal root of the words Dowd selected, we discover that what was going to be Shub, restored, and Bana, established, was Rakob, the way to grow and expand by Charuts, being diligent and decisive. What is being foretold is the fulfillment of the first 3 Miqra'ey in year 4000 Yah, because they provide the benefits of the covenant relationship, the means to grow and to be empowered and enriched for those who are diligent, decisive regarding the terms of acceptance. Now, we also learn that this will occur ba shok ha'etz, in a troubling time of oppression, an anguishing period of subjugation, of restrictions and constraints. Dowd is speaking of Yehudim being persecuted and harassed by the imperial Romans who would crucify him, then being pushed into a corner and confined by her church throughout Europe. Well, I'm anxious to reprise the math and verify the result rather than interrupt the conclusion of this prophecy. Let's table the arithmetic, which you're going to find inspiring, until we have listened to all Dowd has to share. After all, Dowd knew what was going to happen to himself and to his people, and he warned us about it, and yet, nevertheless, Yehudim stood by and allowed it it to occur. It says, then the people, the nation, and the army, the individuals and the institutions of the supreme leader who is making these conspicuous prophetic declarations. The Neged, the absolute ruler, conspicuously allowing, publishing, and confessing his message in your face, who is to come, will attempt to corrupt, ravage, and destroy the city, and the set apart, as well as the sanctuary, those who are separated unto God. And his demise, when he is cast off at the conclusion of this duration of time, will be overwhelming, seem outrageous, especially intense, and a display of tremendous force, so that up to the very last moment in the end, there will be war, and it will be decreed and quickly decided upon and pronounced, which will be devastating and desolating, appalling and horrifying. So there is a period that Gabry'el is explaining that he will be cut off in the fulfillment of Chag Matsah, his soul being dispatched to Sheol, carrying our guilt so that we can be perfected, unleavened of the yeast of religious and political corruption. And then a 7-year period will commence where horrible things will happen. And during that, at the end of it in particular, it will be particularly horrendous. But during that entire 7-year period, this time of Israel's troubles, there will be war. It will be devastating and desolating, appalling, and horrifying. We are 7 months away from the beginning of that time. A challenge to correctly rendering Dowd's intent in this statement is the realization he previously used Neged to speak either of himself as the son of the sovereign or of his herald being someone who would manifest his authority. Once rendered, often rendered, I should say, leader, officer, or official, especially as a prince who is the son of a sovereign, the title can be good or bad depending upon the individual and circumstance. Also, since it is derived from Nagad, which speaks of making an announcement such that something becomes conspicuously known, to make a confession by proclaiming a message, a Nagad is positive or negative based solely upon who is saying what to whom. And in the initial reference, the message was overwhelmingly positive and the individual exceedingly altruistic, but now the opposite is true. Therefore, the Messiah is revealing that he has an evil counterpart, an anti-Messiah, an antichrist. And that horrible individual that's going to be so destructive to Israel and to the world, the very embodiment of Satan, is Donald J. Trump. He is devoted to negating life on this planet. Now, should you venture into the recently completed review that I have provided of Ezekiel in volumes 2 and 3 of the Babel series, you will come to realize that Dowd's adversary is Hasatan. And we are expecting to see the devil incarnate, Donald Trump, in Jerusalem. We know even the day that he is going to arrive. It's the 29th of January in 2030, and the day that he is going to declare that he is a god, bringing to fruition everything that the MAGAs have rallied around. And that is on the Ides of March, the 15th of March in that same year, 2030. The two witnesses arrive on Passover, the 18th of April of that same year. So the devil incarnate, Donald Trump, is going to have a reunion concurrent with bringing all of this hell upon God's people. And since Dowd will have been victimized by those affiliated with the adversary during the and following Chag Matsah, with the Romans torturing him and then religious Christians and Jews devouring and discrediting his achievement, there is continuity between those who destroyed the city and the sanctuary in 70 CE, and again in 133 CE, and even those who would abuse the set-apart people thereafter and the devil's advocate. This being the case, we should be on the lookout for Roman Catholics and leaders from nations emerged from the shadow of Imperial Rome, although I have in previous programs already identified the 10 that will trumpet Donald Trump's message. Also, since Dowd revealed that the Am people, nation, and the belligerents of the Neged political leader calling for the Sukah, the destruction of the city, are related to this adversary, we know where to look for them. Because Yahshua told us they would come from the United States. It is apparent that Dowd's evil opposite will flail and then fail before being sent off to Sheol in the fleeting moments of the 6th millennia, actually on the 24th of September of 2033. Upon his arrival, he will be bombastic in Jerusalem, just as he is now, outrageous, egomaniacal, with a perverted character. An overwhelming presence where the whole world remains fixated on what will he do next. So this last day's tour de force will approach under the guise of being a peacemaker. He's the peace president, you know, as he fans the flames of war against Russia that will be so devastating to the world. Attacked Iran in a day of belligerence, provides all the weapons for Israel to destroy itself and its reputation in Gaza, and now has the U.S. Navy poised to invade Venezuela. But he will quickly decide, of course, that he's going to rally the world against Israel, promoting a war that will be devastating and desolating. So as we discovered previously, at a time certain, 62 weeks of years after Jerusalem is rebuilt, taking us forward in time to year 4000 or 33 CE, the Messiah was going to restore and rebuild the means his people would need to thrive and be diligent and decisive while being oppressed by Imperial Rome. He did so by fulfilling the spring Mow'ed Miqra'ey, providing the benefits of the covenant. However, after this time, the Roman Church, based upon Paul's letters, would replace the anointed Messiah to establish a new covenant. They would position the myth of Jesus Christ as the Son of God and the Messiah instead of David, the man Yahweh declared was the recipient of both titles. Christianity's bogus New Testament is that counterfeit bill. So this, rather than announcing the arrival of a Christian Messiah who would die, but not for himself, says just the opposite. The actual Messiah had this temporal experience and existence cut short and then was separated from his Father to save his people. The greatest life ever lived, Gabry'el, which is God's most capable and confident individual, would perform the most heroic and compassionate act in human history. But of course, it would be for naught, tossed away, tossed aside to make two upstart religions possible, Judaism and Christianity. The lone justification for calling Jesus the Christ has been negated by the actual Messiah. eliminating the claims made by Christians and the denials which propelled Judaism's emergence. Paul and his Roman church have conspired to corrupt and destroy Yahowah's city and people. The ultimate expression of their desire will be manifest in the supreme leader who is to come, verbose and authoritarian. His pronouncements and Jerusalem fate, along with that of Yehudim, will have such a tremendous and devastating impact that the final remnant of Yahowah's chosen will be reduced to very few souls in the end. But since everything we have considered is true, we can see the Torahless one as outrageous, an egomaniacal and overpowering individual that garners the world's attention. We can view Dowd overwhelming him in the end, but until that time, the world will be engulfed in war, devastating, desolating conflict. It will be so destructive and ruinous, indeed astonishing, appalling, and horrifying, that the prophet is predicting, I think, nuclear conflagration. Now, in this way, the Messiah is using the past to prepare his people for the future. Just as Yehudim were given the opportunity to recognize the Passover lamb and the fulfillment of Chag Matsah during a troublesome time, so it will be in the end. Yehudim are to be afforded one final opportunity to accept what Dowd and his father have done for them and arrive together to enable the promise of Kippurym during the conclusion of the time of trouble. Now, in the interim, 3 years before the world goes up in smoke, this monstrous and demonic beast under the ruse of a peacemaker will Gabry'el. He's going to confirm and strengthen a prevailing agreement, affirming his covenant, ha-rabim, with a great many, including those who refer to themselves as rabbis, the preponderance of the populace, and numerous among the elite. This is an ode, of course, to this two-state solution, or as I refer to it as the final dissolution. He will impose the conditions of UN Resolution 242, thereby certifying Israel's destruction. And because the timing of this is tied directly to the fulfillment of Shabu'wah by the prophet Yashayah Isaiah, and that the fulfillment of Shabu'wah for this purpose, as it pertains to the beginning of the 7-year time of Israel's troubles, begins on the 22nd of May, 2026. It becomes obvious that this horrible leader who is demon-possessed is the President of the United States, because there are 72 attributes that are listed by Yashayah in the 18th chapter that describe him as such. And therefore, it is Donald J. Trump. And he is the one who is going to affirm this treaty with many. To use Isaiah's words, he's going to thin Israel at the waist so that the country becomes indefensible. This is what he's been positioning for ever since he was demon-possessed and then bribed by the Muslims running Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. This is what the world celebrated at Peace 25, why Israel was not invited. The very man that Israel views as the second coming of Cyrus is in fact the great betrayer. Israel is now a vassal of the Antichrist. That's how far they have fallen. This is where we are. So what follows affirms what we have long known. Well, the time of Jacob's troubles is going to begin with the devastation of the time of Israel's troubles. And the birth pangs actually began on October 7th, 2023, and will conclude a decade thereafter. Things are going to get much worse by Towrah and, by Shabu'wah in 2026. This is going to be a horrific experience for Yisrael. Things will degrade very quickly, with the worst of Yaakov's troubles endured during that last 3.5 years, beginning with the first of Abib in 5997 Yah, April 3rd of 2030 at sunset. The Shabat will ultimately be outlawed. Pesach will be corrupted and Matsah negated to an ingredient. There will be no Kippurym for the Torahless one, and he's going to put God's ultimate gift of salvation out of reach. And Yahweh's Miqra'ey will be replaced with the likes of the Feast of the Beast, where Dowd's body and blood and that of his Bashar are on the menu. There will be a no moon day, a do nothing festival, and all stupid day for the faithful, each endorsed by Ezekiel's Lord. So it is going to be abhorrence personified, appalling abominations, a monstrous religious edict designated to stun and stupefy people far and wide, and robbed of their ability to be perceptive and think critically. The preponderance of people are going to die over the next 8 years. It's all going to happen very quickly and decisively. It's going to paralyze the world that has become almost accustomed to this ongoing cavalcade of chaos that ensues from every word and deed of Donald Trump as the Antichrist. I'd like to conclude this program at this point. We will return to this because it is such an important realization for where we are, whose side you should be on, why you should be exceedingly worried about the MAGA, about the Christians that are endorsing this man, about the Israelis who think that Trump is the return of Cyrus when he is in fact the Torahless one, the great betrayer of whom the prophet spoke. It is a time that you need to make certain that you're on the right side of this equation, because many will die, and they will die separated from God, and those who have deliberately misled others have pursued an anti-Semitic agenda. Well, they're not going to get the luxury of death, and they will be taken into Sheol to spend an eternity there. So what we're going to share with you in these next programs is essential for you to know. I thank you for listening.